In medieval times, many battles had been fought between the Crusaders and the Muslim Caliphates over the Holy Land and the important Jerusalem, which both parties sought to gain. As most of the Christian forces were sent to a different expedition, the 16-year-old king of Jerusalem, heavily affected by leprosy, Baldwin IV was left alone with a small force against the invading Ayyubids led by Saladin. On November 25, 1177, the two opposing forces met at the Battle of Montgisard in the Levant between Ramla and Yibna in what will be one of the most notable engagements of the Crusades. The Arab Byzantine was from 629 to 1050s resulted in the Muslim conquest of the Levant and Egypt by the Rashidun Caliphate, and Jerusalem was captured in 637. In 1099, during the First Crusade, Jerusalem was captured by the Christians and many states were set up in the Levant by the Crusaders, such as the counties of Edessa and Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The founder of the new Ayyubid dynasty, Saladin, was a rising force of the Muslim world who fought alongside his uncle, General Shirkuh. In the Battle of Ayyubids, Shirkuh died and Saladin was appointed as vizier. The Fatimid ruler, Ayyubid, died and Saladin took advantage of this power vacuum, effectively taking control of the country, establishing a new Muslim dynasty, switching Egypt's allegiance to the Baghdad-based Abbasid Caliphate. Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, Amalric's only son, became king on July 5, 1174 at the age of 13. As a leper, he wasn't expected to live long due to his disease and served with a number of regents. In 1177, Baldwin IV and Philip of Alsace, who had recently arrived on pilgrimage, planned an alliance with the Byzantine Empire for a naval attack on Egypt. But none of these plans came to fruition. Instead, Philip decided to join Raymond of Tripoli's expedition to attack the Saracen stronghold of Harem in northern Syria. A large Crusader army, the Knights Hospitaller and many Templar Knights followed him. This left the Kingdom of Jerusalem with very few troops to defend its various territories. Meanwhile, Saladin was planning his own invasion of the Kingdom of Jerusalem from Egypt. When he was informed of the expedition north, he wasted no time in organizing a raid and invaded the kingdom with an army of some 30,000 men. Learning of Saladin's plans, Baldwin left Jerusalem with, according to William of Tyre, only 375 knights to attempt a defense at Ascalon, but Baldwin was stalled there by a detachment of troops sent by Saladin. Saladin left part of his army to besiege Gaza and a smaller force at Ascalon and marched northward with the rest, planning to take Jerusalem from the small Christian force. The true numbers are impossible to estimate, since the Christian sources refer only to knights and give no account of the number of infantry and turcopoles, except that it is evident from the number of the dead and wounded that there must have been more men than the 375 knights. It is also uncertain whether the so-called knights included mounted sergeants or squires, or whether they were true knights. One contemporary chronicler gave a strength of 7,000 for the Latin army, while another contemporary estimate of 20,000 was probably a textual corruption of 10,000. However, modern historians generally deem the number of Frankish troops to have been lower: 375 knights and 80 Templars for less than 500 armoured heavy cavalry, as well as 2,500 to 4,000 infantry and archers, spearmen, swordsmen, axemen, crossbowmen and turcopoles. Could explain why Saladin did not remotely believe such a tiny force of Christians should be considered a threat and marched at his leisure on Jerusalem, allowing his army to spread out across the countryside to pillage the kingdom's farmlands. Just as uncertain are the numbers of their opponents. An 1181 review listed Saladin's Mamluk forces at 6,976 ghulams and 1,553 karagulams. However, there would have been additional soldiers available in Syria and elsewhere, while auxiliaries might have accompanied the Mamluks. William of Tyre reported Saladin's strength as 26,000, while an anonymous chronicler estimated 12,000 Turkish and 9,000 Arab troops, which Stevenson calls greatly exaggerated. Accompanying Baldwin was Raynald de Chatillon, Lord of Ultra-Jourdain, who had just been released from captivity in Aleppo in 1176. Raynald was a fierce enemy of Saladin and was King Baldwin's second in command. Also with the army were Baldwin of Ibelin, his brother Balian, Reginald Grenier, and Jocelyn III of Edessa. Eudes de Saint-Amand, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, came with 80 Templar Knights. Another Templar force attempted to meet Baldwin at Ascalon, but they remained besieged at Gaza. Saladin continued his march towards Jerusalem, thinking that Baldwin would not dare to follow him with so few men. He attacked Ramla, Lydda and Arsuf, but because Baldwin was supposedly not a danger, he allowed his army to be spread out over a large area, pillaging and foraging. However, unknown to Saladin, the forces he had left to subdue the king had been insufficient, and now both Baldwin and the Templars were marching to intercept him before he reached Jerusalem. The Christians, led by the king, pursued the Muslims along the coast, finally catching their enemies at Montgisard near Ramla. The location is disputed, as Ramla was a large region that included the town under the same name. Malcolm Barber equates Montgisard with the mound of Ai Safiya. Saladin's chronicler Imad ad-Din Isfahani refers to the battle taking place by the mound of Ai Safiya, potentially modern Tel es-Safi near the village of Menahem, not far from Ashkelon, and within the contemporary Ramla province. Ai Safiya means white, and indeed, the Es-Safi hill is white with the foundations of a Crusader castle recently found at the top, called Blanchegard. Ibn Thur, one of the Arab chroniclers, mentions that Saladin intended to lay siege to a Crusader castle in the area, but Saladin's baggage train had been apparently mired. There is a small stream north of Tel es-Safi bordering farmland that in November might have been ploughed up and muddy enough to hinder the passage of the baggage train. The Egyptian chroniclers agree that the baggage had been delayed at a river. Saladin was taken totally by surprise. His army was in disarray. Part had been held up by the mired baggage train, while another part of his force had scattered into raiding parties across the countryside. The horses were tired from the long march. Some men had to hurry to collect their weapons from the baggage train. Saladin's army, in a state of panic, scrambled to make battle lines against the enemy. King Baldwin ordered the relic of the True Cross to be raised in front of the troops. The king, whose teenage body was already ravaged by aggressive leprosy, was helped from his horse and dropped to his knees before the cross. He prayed to God for victory and rose to his feet to cheers from his men, who were moved by what they had just witnessed. The Jerusalem army attacked the hurriedly arranged Muslims, inflicting heavy casualties. The king, fighting with bandaged hands to cover his sores, was in the thick of the fighting. Egyptian effective command was under Saladin's nephew Taqi ad-Din. Taqi ad-Din apparently attacked while Saladin was putting his Mamluk guard together. Tawqi's son, Aim, died in the early fighting. Saladin's men were quickly overwhelmed. Saladin himself only avoided capture by escaping, as Ralph de Decetto claims, on a racing camel. By nightfall, those Egyptians that were with the Sultan had reached Konida Mestanelarum, near the mound of Tel el-Hisi. This is about 25 miles from Ramla. It is only about 7 kilometers from Tel es-Safi. Baldwin pursued Saladin until nightfall and then retired to Ascalon. Only a remnant of his army made to Egypt. Baldwin memorialized his victory by erecting a Benedictine monastery on the battlefield dedicated to Saint Catherine of Alexandria, whose feast day fell on the day of the battle. However, it was a difficult victory. Roger de Moulins, Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, reported that 1,100 men had been killed and 750 returned home wounded. Meanwhile, Raymond III of Tripoli and Bohan III of Antioch joined with Philip of Alsace in a separate expedition against Harim in Syria. The siege of Harim lasted into 1178, and Saladin's defeat at Montgisard prevented him from relieving his Syrian vassals.